Hello everyone and welcome to the big clash I know a lot of you have been waiting for. It is round 6 of the Prague Chess Festival Masters section. It is Nodirbek Abdusattorov versus Praggnanandhaa. Prague had those two unfortunate losses to Parham Maghsoodlou and Richard Rapport, and Nodirbek just crushing the entire event. It is definitely a match that everyone wants to see. Nodirbek in incredible form, not a member of the candidates tournament in Prague, also pretty much always incredible. Has qualified for the candidates tournament. So let's check it out. And also in this video, I will show you what happened in the game between Vidit and Vincent Keymer. It's not a miniature, but I felt it was too short of a conclusion of the game to make it a separate video. So I'm including it in this one. So if you just want to see that, you can also just use the, stuff below. So let's check it out. Nodirbek with the white pieces opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. The Ruy Lopez is on the board. a6, Prague goes for Morphy's defense. We have bishop back to a4 and knight g to e7, going into the Cosio defense. Castles and knight to g6. Very, very rare stuff on this level, but Prague employs it. We have c3, pawn to d5, striking in the center. E captures, queen captures. Now the queen is very safe here. There's a pawn on c3, so you don't have to worry about knight to c3. Bishop to b3. Now the bishop kicks away the queen, and queen to d3, forcing the bishop to move back if you want to develop your d pawn. So bishop back to c2, and now queen back to d6. And now, okay, you wasted a move with the queen, but white also wasted some time with the bishop, and the bishop is much less active on c2. Maybe it's going to be more active, but for the moment it's less active than, for example, on b3. Rook to e1, and now there is a game where bishop to e7 was played, but here we have bishop to e6, and already as of move 10 we have a completely new game. So okay, Nodirbek strikes with pawn to d4 and bishop to e7. Interestingly, you can actually capture. It looks a bit weird because the king is on the e-file uncastled. But if your plan is to castle, for example, queenside, you can do this. But Prague has a different idea. He actually wants to castle kingside here. Bishop to e7, we have bishop to e3, e captures on d4, knight captures on d4, we have knight captures, and bishop captures on d4, putting pressure on that g7 pawn. And here Prague just castles. We have knight to d2 and pawn to c5 now, chasing away the bishop, bishop to e3, and queen to c7. Now preparing to bring the rook into the game. Queen to h5 makes sense as the bishop is on c2, so now the knight cannot move. You can maybe move it to f8, but yeah, for the moment you can't move. Rook 8 to d8, and now pawn to g3. We have rook to d5, chasing away the queen. Queen back to e2, and now just pawn to b5, grabbing more space on the queen side. And now you have to decide how to continue here. Do you strike with a4 right away, or do you play pawn to f4? You can't really play something like rook 8 to d1, even though it's an open d file. But white, of course, has plans of executing a4, and you want your rook on a1 for that. So it's a decision between f4 and a4. Here we have pawn to f4 first, and now okay, f5 not a threat at the moment, but somehow if you get rid of the rook, then f5 could be a threat. So here Prague just reinforces the f5 square, bishop to e4, kicking away the rook, rook d to d8, and now pawn to a4. So of course everything makes sense here. Bishop to g4, attacking the queen, grabbing more space, queen to f2, now putting some pressure on the c5 pawn, but okay, it's defended by the queen and by the bishop. So bishop to f5, offering a trade of bishops, and a captures on b5. We have a captures and bishop back to g2. Nodirbek wants to keep material on the board. We have bishop to h3, offering a trade, even bishop to h1. And now Prague strikes with pawn to b4. You know, that's an important game to make in any game. Pawn to c4, and now bishop to f6, putting pressure on the b2 pawn. And now rook to a8 by Nodirbek. Here, objectively, knight to e4 is the way to go, but yeah, it's not all that clear why. Point is that it really weakens the c5 pawn, and even if you play something like bishop to d4 to defend, and let's say captures now, if you capture with the rook, then you can just go after the pawn with rook to a5. So that's one way to do it. Or if you capture with the pawn, then c5, you have a nice defended pawn on c5. c6 will also be guarded by the bishop, but then you also have to give black the past d pawn. So it's definitely a trade-off. But Nodirbek went for rook to a8. Attacking the queen, queen to d7, and now rook captures on d8. We have rook captures, and now knight to e4. So, okay, putting pressure on the bishop, but here comes queen to d3, trying to trade the c5 pawn for the c4 pawn, and Nodirbek goes for it. Bishop capture. You could also capture on f6 first, but he says no need for that, just bishop captures on c5. Queen captures on c4, and now knight to d6, attacking the queen while the bishop is nicely defended here. So queen to b3, now putting pressure on the b2 pawn, and bishop to f3. Here, Nodirbek wants to go bishop h5 to put pressure on this f7 pawn, and it really is a nasty idea. We have bishop to h6, or you could capture the pawn right away, but if you capture the pawn right away, then some knight to b7 stuff going after the rook. And now where do you move the rook? Then knight to a5 attacks the queen. You will have trouble keeping an eye on this bishop. So instead, after bishop to f3, not h5, h6 was played, creating some breathing room for the black king. And now we have bishop to h5. And now the trick is, if you go, for example, after the pawn, and it's not really a trick because bishop captures is the best move for Pragg. But if bishop captures on b2, and knight captures on f7 was the idea. And now, after king capture, or you have to capture with the queen, that's sort of the point, and then queen captures on b2. But this is fine for black. The problem is if king captures, then you have f5, and yeah, I mean, it's still a objectively an equal position, but it's going to be very hard to play. You have to capture with the pawn. You can't capture with the bishop because you lose control over the d1 square. But yeah, I mean, it does feel like even with the control of these two squares that the black king is a little bit safer. So, you know, you definitely could go for that. But okay, after bishop to h5, queen to d5 was played by Pragg, and now you have to be really careful. If you move this queen away from the defense of the g2 square, you're going to get checkmated. So here, bishop to f3, attacking the queen, queen back to b3, and bishop to h5 would have been a offer of a draw, basically repeating moves. But Nodirbek does not want to draw, and he plays rook to e2. Sort of defending the b2 pawn, saying that I will just continue playing afterwards. But there is a big problem here. This move loses the game. Up until this point, both of them played pretty much perfect chess. But now Pragg is completely winning, but it's not easy to spot why. As if, I mean, if Nodirbek didn't see it, then it can be easy. Feel free to pause the video here and win the game for Pragg while I give you a couple of seconds. And it's not just important to see the first move, because I'm sure everyone sees the first move. It's important to see further down the line, so you know, go deep in this one. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding, I think it's the fourth move of the line is the difficult one. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is a rook captures on d6. So what did Nodirbek miss here? Of course, if he captures the rook, then queen to d1 check is now possible. As the rook to e2, the previous move that Nodirbek made, the bishop no longer controls d1, and then you're going to win that bishop. But it's not that simple. Of course, Nodirbek will not miss that. Nodirbek played rook to e8 check. Now the d1 square is nicely defended. So what did he miss? King to h7, and now we have bishop captures on d6. But now comes the move that Nodirbek missed, and that is bishop to d4. Skewering the queen, and you have to take the bishop, otherwise you're just going to lose the queen. So queen captures on d4, and now queen captures on f3. Pragg is threatening checkmate on g2, and the only way to stop it is queen to f2, and now you play queen d1 check and finally take that bishop on d6, which results in having a lot more material. Rook to e1, blocking check, and now queen captures on d6, and now Pragg has a bishop and knight against the rook, and now it's merely a matter of if Pragg can win this objectively winning position. So okay, let's see how he does it. Queen to e3, or if he does it. We have bishop back to e6, rook to e2, and now knight to e7. So you just have to avoid, you know, some tricks, but other than that, there's really no way for the queen and rook to break through this. Like the pawn and bishop are you know, guarding against pretty much everything that Nodirbek can throw at Pragg, especially with the f5 square covered. There's nothing here. So okay, queen to e5, offering a queen trade. At least Nodirbek can maybe try playing an endgame. queen to b6 check, queen to e3, and now Pragg doesn't have to trade queens, and it would probably be even easier to do it with the queens on the board, but Pragg wants to show that he is technically, you know, bulletproof here. Rook captures on e3, pawn to b3. Now he has a beautiful defended pawn on b3, and the tactic or the strategy for this game is now simple. With the pawn guarded, the knight will simply find a way to get to the b2 pawn, and that's the story of this game. So king to f2 was played, pawn to g6, stopping f5 forever. We have pawn to g4, and now king to g7. Pawn to h3, king to f6, and now rook to e4. So trying to prevent the dead knight from reaching the b2 pawn, and only the knight can reach it. It's on a dark square, so the bishop is useless, and you kind of don't expect to see the black king over there. So here, pawn to h5, just king to g3. We have knight to d5. Now the knight starts its journey. King to h4, h captures on g4, h captures, and king back to g7. Just a very, very elegant, not allowing for even the remote possibility of some sort of a trick happening here. Pawn to g5 with bishop to f5, now shifting the bishop over to c2 to prevent the rook from even having a chance of defending the b2 pawn. Rook to c4, and now bishop to c2, and that's just it. Now the maneuver will be rook to knight to e3, knight to d1, and then just knight captures on b2. That's what happened in the game. King g3, knight to e3, and he was in this position on move 56 that Nodirbek Abdusattorov resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So beautifully done by Pragg. As usual, Pragg just makes chess look extremely simple. Doesn't matter who his opponent is, and Nodirbek definitely had fighting spirit in this one, but it just seems the fighting spirit fought back in the form of young Praggnanandhaa here. But yeah, you resign because after you move the rook, it's a matter of the simple knight d1. You move the king in, knight captures on b2, you bring the king closer. Let's say knight a4, you have b2 guarded, you have b1 guarded. It's just b2, b1, queen, and that's it. Black will have to give up the rook, somehow doesn't really matter. And then you'll have a bishop and knight versus a lonely king. So yeah, very nicely done by both of them, but Nodirbek was not satisfied with a draw with the white pieces, even against you know, a member of the candidates tournament. He just doesn't care. He wants to fight, but like I said, this time the fighting spirit fought back. But now let's check out what happened in that funny game between these two gentlemen, between Vidit and Vincent. You guys will absolutely love this one. So we have again some 12 moves of known theory. It was the English opening: c4, knight f6, knight to c3, e5, and as usual, the 4 knights of the English. When you have the English, you always have the 4 knights of the English. That's just how modern chess works. G3 and G3, and now bishop to b4, putting pressure on the knight here. Bishop to g2, and now castles by both players. So castles. We have pawn to e4. And knight to g5. So just, you know, everything going after that e4 pawn. Bishop captures on c3, we have b captures, and rook to e8, defending the pawn. Queen to c2, piling up on the pawn, and queen to e7, defending the pawn. d3, and okay, e captures, and pawn to d6. So all been played before, nothing new here. Knight back to f3, and now there is a game where bishop to f5 was played, and it was even played by a former world champion, Vasya Smyslov, in 1966 between Maximilian Witelki and the great Vasily Smyslov, but the game ended in a draw. Here we have pawn to h6, and it is in fact the strongest move recommended by the engine, and it is now as of move 12 that we have a completely new game. So okay, pawn to h3, taking away the g4 square from the black pieces, also having maybe some ideas of g4, g5 in the future. Bishop to e6 by Vincent, and knight to d4, putting pressure on the bishop and knight here. So you want to keep your bishop, you take the knight, c captures, even though it kind of improves white's position in the center. Vincent doesn't care. We have pawn to d5, and now pawn to c5. A bit maybe anti-positional, but comes with a very strong idea. Knight to h7. Also, c6 can be played, but you know that rook to b1 is coming, so you don't want to weaken your b7 pawn. So here, knight to h7, shifting the knight over to g5, rook to b1, and now just pawn to b6. Bishop to f4, putting pressure on the c6 pawn, and also you have to be very careful if c6 or something is played, or even well, if you give up the d6 square, could be very annoying. So here, knight to f8, now shifting the knight to g6 to put pressure on the bishop. Rook f to e1, now the bishop is pinned, so you should kind of move the queen. Queen to d7, putting pressure on h3, and now pawn to c6, chasing away the queen first, queen to d8, and pawn to h4. We have pawn to g5, Vincent goes for the attack on the king side, h captures, and bishop back to d2, and pawn to f6. So this weakens the king a little bit, but, he obviously was feeling very inspired. So pawn to f4, strongest move recommended by the engine, with it objectively incredibly strong as usual. G4, gaining more control here on the king side, and maybe preparing to shift some pieces over to the attack. But it's always dangerous when there's a bishop on g2, or on b2, or on g7, or on b7. It doesn't matter if you have a rook and queen, for example, on h7 and h6. You can give one check, but that's pretty much it. With the bishop covering h1, there is never checkmate. So okay, g4, we have pawn to f5, chasing away the bishop, and the question is, why did he allow this pawn sacrifice? Well, let's see what happens. Bishop captures on f5, rook captures on e8, queen captures, and now bishop captures on d5. So it's not really a sacrifice. This comes with check, and now Vincent's move sort of reminds me of the famous Nizhmetdinov versus Chernikov game, the one where he just didn't feel like playing solid moves that lead to a draw. He wanted to fight. He felt restless, and he didn't just play king g7. He played bishop to e6, which looks like a really silly move to play. Why would you allow this self-pin to be made? But some of the most beautiful moves in chess history were actually self-pins. So let's see what happens here. Rook to e1, of course, the only move to play. What is Vincent's idea here? So I'm guessing either Vincent overlooked that this is actually great for Vidit, or he actually planned what happens next. Now, the reason why you can't play queen to f7 is that objectively, let's say bishop captures, knight captures. Okay, you put more pressure on that knight, and now after rook to e8 defending, you have this annoying d5 move. And after the knight moves, there's also rook captures, and after the queen, or even knight captures to guard the d6 square, you have queen captures on g4. With queen to d7, and this is a problem, and this will be very good for white in pretty much all the lines. Queen d7, now you cannot trade queens, and after you move the queen, bishop to f4, you go after the pawn, and okay, you can give some checks, but the white king will find some sort of safety on the king side, and white will win the game here. So either Vincent only miscalculated this, and that's the reason why he played his next move, or he just went willingly into this when he self-pinned. If that, I mean, then he truly is a legend. He plays bishop captures on d5. He sacrifices the queen, which like Nizhmetdinov's sacrifice against Chernikov, maybe not objectively winning, but definitely interesting. So let's see what happens. Rook captures, and now queen to d1. It is the only way to win the game with white, and Vidit finds it. Now, the reason why it's so strong, the g4 pawn is hanging, and if you defend with the bishop, then queen to b3 check, and of course after the king moves, then you get to play d5, then later on d6, then the bishop comes to this diagonal, or you play bishop here and then execute d6. So this is the way for white to win. So that's why Vincent plays pawn to f5, but now comes queen to f1. The f5 pawn is weak, so bishop to f3, and now pawn to d5. So okay, he gets what he wanted. Of course, now if you capture, then the f5 pawn falls. So what can you do here? Rook to e7. Of course, the idea is rook h7 and rook to h1. If Vincent can play this, and this is basically the dream, then he just might have something. And pretty much any move is winning here for Vidit. He can play queen to c1, or winning. He can play queen to a1. He can play bishop to h6. He can play many moves, and the position is still winning for him. It will take some grinding, but he will win the game. However, the move that he played is just losing. He played bishop to b4, attacked the rook, but yeah, I have no idea how he missed this. And he spent like a minute on bishop to b4, and he had 15 minutes on the clock. So very uncharacteristic of Vidit, but it's probably, probably just what happens in chess when you have your opponent just gave up his queen apparently for no good reason. You have so many winning moves, and then I guess you just relaxed. Maybe he was already, thinking about what he's gonna do today, how he's gonna troll Anish on Twitter, for his sort of not the most exemplary performance in Schengen. Probably his mind started wandering, and then he just missed Vincent's next move, which I'm pretty sure you know what it is, as I've already told you. So I don't have to pause the video. Vincent just played rook to h7, and that's pretty much it. There's no defense here. The problem is, what do you play? And where do you move the queen? There's no square for your queen, and if you allow rook to h1, you're just going to lose the queen. And if you play queen to f2, then you've taken away the only square from the white king, and rook to h1 is checkmate. So you can't play that. So Vidit played king to f2. He said, all right, maybe I can get my king somewhere. But Vincent just played rook to h1, and it was in this position on move 35 that Vidit Gujrati resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The queen has no squares, and that's pretty much it. You have to capture, and once you capture, you're just down a piece. And yes, you have some pawns here, but there's just never a way for you to execute d6, because if you push it, the bishop just takes the c6 pawn, so it's not really relevant. You push it, you take here, you capture this, bishop b7 guards the queening square, and it's also a light square, so you have no use for the dark square bishop here. So yeah, heartbreaking loss for Vidit, but yeah, I mean, just the incredible Chad move by Vincent here in this position. Like I said, I would really love to know if Vincent planted the self-pin with the queen sacrifice, or maybe he just miscalculated that Vidit's position was winning. Either way, incredible stuff by young Vincent here. So yeah, that's the game, or rather, those were the games. Hope you enjoyed both of them. I would like to thank Kristen is the best wife, Chris Karskadan, Donche on YouTube, Kerekesh Tibor, and Kellen is the best girlfriend for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos. Sarah, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.